Hey, Coach Abel here with Coach Weiss, the Able Body Experts, continuing our address of gluten intolerance as a reflection of the diet mentality in terms of creating perceptual bias and fear-mongering among consumers. So our last clip we talked about what's called an elective affinity, whereas the more popular the Atkins diet became, we show on a chart in terms of how it's mentioned in the media, then all of a sudden gluten intolerance as a concept appeared along with it because there was a way to market two things at the same time. And so gluten intolerance came on the coattails of the popularity of Atkins. So as Atkins died, the gluten intolerance phenomenon kept riding those coattails. So in the last clip we talked about history reflecting this throughout the generations. So what I want to go is back in time. Then we see a similar pattern emerge back in the 1990s when the main dietary villains were saturated fat and cholesterol. The dietary fad of that era, again, dietary fad, yes, gluten intolerance, dietary fad, was the olive oil soaked quote-unquote Mediterranean diet and a reduced intake of meat and dairy. This is the 90s. As doctors and dietitians urged us away from butter and ice cream, we started to become more aware of how hard it was to digest these unhealthy foods, and nutritional advice all of a sudden became a medical issue. The second newspaper chart that's not included here that we're going to talk about shows how newspapers that mentioned lactose intolerance and lactose sensitivity track mentions of the Mediterranean diet as an alternative interest in both phenomena, peaking in 1995, once again catering to the diet mentality of illness over wellness, right? Limitation, the answer over personal discipline. So we go back to the 90s, Coach, and what we see is saturated fat and cholesterol, they're the enemies. Don't eat meat. Go on this Mediterranean diet. Have as much olive oil and green beans as you want. And that's the answer, and we're going to talk to you about how and why you're sick, and we're going to sell you wellness. Same thing going on with the gluten intolerance issue. Let's market to people how and why they're sick, and then sell them wellness. Coach?
Yeah, and that comes around and around full circle. It seems like every few decades. Like I think saturated fat became the villain originally in the 50s or something, and then it's kind of come back around, and now gluten just happens to be the villain of choice for today, right? So
but I don't want to get too off on what we're talking about, the voguing trends, which is important, and the elective affinities that are created through media. But I also want to talk about the last line of this segment is catering to the diet mentality that limitation, right, of a certain food substance is more important than personal discipline. How many people do you and I deal with, Coach, who tell us they can't eat this, they can't eat that, and yet they only diet Monday to Thursday, and they want a diet that explains their weight issues to them. So this feeds that mentality.
And as we were talking about before, all these foods that they can't eat this, can't eat that. When they're not following their diet, that's the foods that they're eating.
Yeah, they're gluten intolerant, but they eat pizza. Yeah, they're lactose intolerant, but they have ice cream.
Yeah, so just like you said, it's easier to say I can't eat this than to just not eat it.
And then the ones out there who are about to defend themselves and say, well, that's not me. I have gluten intolerance and lactose intolerant, and I don't eat either of those things. I just eat a lot of candy and chocolate.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, or really, really crave those things. So every once in a while I freak out and I eat them. Well, why do you think you freak out?
Hopefully you see where we're going with this. The issue that we're talking about is gluten intolerance, but it's only an example of what I call the diet mentality that is fed to us in what I call industry voguing trends and presented as what we call elective affinities. And the charts, you saw the charts, Coach, I showed them to you, that show the trends of these things appearing together as they're marketed. So it's not really science.
Yeah.
All right? It's an actual creation of what I call the diet mentality, which does nobody any good.